where did this social justice movement, the critical race theory ideology, can you give us a little background just to hint? You write about it in your book because this has been looming from the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, 50s, and 60s. But in 1989, I believe you write that a very important meeting took place that catapulted this conversation to where we are today. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, I have that section on the class of '89. It's interesting. You got to go back even before the 1920s. You got to go back to the 1800s and Karl Marx, and Karl Marx's ideology as brought forward by guys like Antonio Gramsci, who was an Italian Marxist in the 1920s and 1930s, who was in prison under the fascists. You have to get to the Frankfurt School. And you also have to look at things like postmodernism and guys like Jacques Derrida and others, and Foucault and others. And then when you come to 1989, you have this first meeting, really, of critical race theorists. That's their first sort of organized meeting. It happened in Wisconsin, but the ideology, the academic theory was really born at Harvard Law School. Derrick Bell was the really main catalyst there. Kimberlé Crenshaw was his protege. Kimberlé Crenshaw is the one who gives us the idea of intersectionality. I mean, we hear people talk about intersectionality all the time, and these sort of, intersecting lines of oppression. So if you're a minority, you're oppressed. If you're a woman, you're oppressed. If you're a sexual minority, you're oppressed. And so a Black, female, lesbian, or transgender would have more oppression than, say, a white Christian male, would. Actually, a white Christian male would be the oppressor. And so her main paper on that was also published in 1989. Also, Peggy McIntosh's paper on white privilege. The idea of white privilege had been talked about before then, but the seminal paper on that is Peggy McIntosh's paper that was published in 1989. And also there was a book published by two Harvard professors called After the Ball, How America Will Overcome Its Fear and Hatred of Gays in the Decade of the 90s, I believe is the subtitle. But it is a propaganda piece on basically changing the way people think about homosexuality by piggybacking on the civil rights movement and really, sort of critical race theory type of ideas. So all of these things are interrelated. Peggy McIntosh was a women's studies professor, the one who wrote the book on white privilege. And she's also talking about male privilege in the same paper and at the same time. And so what people don't understand is that the critical social justice movement, people get into this because they talk about so-called racial justice, but the critical social justice movement is like a train with a bunch of boxcars. And we see the racial justice train, but right behind it is the feminist train. And right behind that is the LGBTQIA plus train. And then behind that is the climate justice train. And behind that is, the open borders justice train, and so on and so forth, because it's all coming from the same ideology and from the same roots.
Mm-hmm.